federal provincial investment helps save 3,000 jobs at the Ford plant. It's also a key part of the federal government's plan to transition to a greener economy to help reach a goal of net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Navdeep Bains is Canada's Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry. And how about this? He's actually a former Ford employee. He is with me now. Minister Bains, it's good to talk to you again. Where does this investment today put Canada in the international competition to meet a growing demand for electric vehicles?
So the key point is you're absolutely right. There is a growing demand for zero-emission vehicles. If you look at Canada right now, there's about 136,000 vehicles on the road that are referred to as ZEVs, or zero-emission vehicles. And that number is going to increase to 13.2 million by 2030, so a significant increase. And this positions Canada really well. This investment by Ford is significant, $1.8 billion, the largest facility for their battery electric vehicles in North America. And the key element here is it also supports the transformation for our supply chain as well.
Okay, we'll get into that a little bit. Does the federal investment, $295 million, does that include any job guarantees from Ford in return for that federal and provincial money?
Yeah, the key element is, of course, maintaining and securing 5,400 jobs. And it's important to note, it's not only the direct jobs that are going to be supported by this, but the indirect jobs. So for every one person on the assembly line, there's 7 to 9 jobs that it supports. And I'm talking about dealerships here. I'm talking about suppliers here. So there's many, many other jobs that will benefit from this investment.
What I'm talking about, though, is there anything built into this agreement that says if Ford hits a rough patch, what does Ford have to do in return for this money? Does it guarantee those Canadian jobs? Because we've seen investments in other companies that the government has made, and then jobs disappear shortly after. So what are the guarantees?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to note that the market for this product, these battery electric vehicles, is only going to increase. There's going to be more demand, more consumers want these types of vehicles. So I'm optimistic that the market looks strong. But in terms of the job guarantees that you talk about, we've made sure that this investment secures these 5,400 jobs for the next 10 years.
Okay, that's what I was looking for. Now, you talked about the spin-off effects, the battery production piece. What effect would this investment have on, for instance, Canadian mining companies?
Well, this sends a very positive signal to our Canadian mining companies. It says you're part of our strategy, which we call Mines to Mobility. This is about leveraging Canada's strength in the mining sector, access to key raw materials like nickel, cobalt, graphite, aluminum. These are essential ingredients that we need to build the batteries here. And if you look at the workforce that we have in Canada, which has been building vehicles for well over 100 years, we have a highly skilled workforce. We have access to these raw materials. And so that's a very strong value proposition for investments. And that's why Ford made such a significant investment in their Oakville facility.
I know you talked about the estimates for the growth in electric vehicle sales, but they're still lagging despite the government incentives for buyers. There's a need for more charging stations, we know that. What's the plan to build more charging stations, and is there a plan to provide more incentives to encourage those sales?
Yeah, there's 2 key components to it. One is the infrastructure component. We absolutely need to invest in infrastructure and charging stations, and that is why in the last budget we allocated $300 million for different types of infrastructure investments to support clean technologies, including charging stations for zero-emission vehicles. But we also recognize that consumers need to have the right incentives as well, and we're very proud of the rebate program that we put in place, which has helped accelerate sales here in Canada. But it's important to note that the market investments, the capital investments made by the companies are reducing the cost as well for these vehicles. And because consumer demand is going up, that too will help complement the overall sales in this sector.
It was noted today at the announcement that the Ontario government canceled incentives for electric vehicle purchases. Would you like the Premier of Ontario to reconsider that move, since he's investing money to build these cars?
I think it would be the prudent and smart choice to make. It's, in my opinion, that's the right path. You need to have a holistic approach. Not only are we supporting the mining sector, we're supporting the manufacturing sector, but we need to focus on consumers as well by building the infrastructure and providing them with the rebates. All that combined, I think, creates really strong market conditions for these vehicles to be made here in Canada and sold here in Canada. And ultimately, that creates jobs, but also helps us meet our climate change targets as well.
Okay, well, I've got you. I want to ask you about PPE. That's also under your purview. We're hitting a second wave of COVID-19 now. You're in charge of trying to get Canadian companies producing more personal protective equipment. How's that going?
Well, you have to realize we started virtually from scratch. In March, when this pandemic really hit and we took measures to keep people safe, we were reliant on international suppliers for personal protective equipment. And we recognized that international demand was significant and our supply chains internationally were being strained. So we ramped up and retooled our local supply base by saying, look, we're going to have a call to action and ask businesses to step up. And over 6,500 businesses put up their hand and said, we will help retool, rescale our facilities. And right now, I'm proud to say that over 1,000 companies are doing that. And it's really important to note that means we as a government have options. So for every dollar that we spend now on procurement for personal protective equipment, 50 cents is now going towards Canadian companies and Canadian solutions and is sourced locally.
All right, good to hear. Navdeep Bains, thanks for your time tonight. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks very much for having me on.